What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at Manchester United versus Manchester City in the English Premier League and how Man City pretty much just played Manchester United off the pitch, with this being one of the crucial matches that could decide Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's future, and this could have very well been his last game in charge for Manchester United. When you look at the past week they've had, starting with the Liverpool loss, they did win against Tottenham, a tie against Atalanta, and now a loss to Manchester City. It just doesn't seem like it'll be enough to keep him in charge much longer at Manchester United. But before we get into the tactics behind the match, check out both my books. They're online, they're on Amazon, and there's links in the description below. Also, be sure to check out Keyframe. It's how I made this video, and there's also a link to that in the description below. As for the tactics behind this match, we'll start with Manchester City. Manchester City built from the back using their typical formation this season, with two central defenders of John Stones and Ruben Diaz, and alongside them would often come Kyle Walker. Kyle Walker often played as a third central defender in possession when he would shift across, with Cancelo on this left-hand side, varying his position and his height, often occupying a space higher up the field, but also being able to come into the half space in a more advanced position. Rodri typically played as the single pivot today, with three attacking midfielders of Bernardo Silva, Ilkay Gundogan, and Kevin De Bruyne all in front of him, and matching up against United either when they played with a back five or a back four. These three players were crucial in their movements and how they were able to break Manchester United down. So especially the players in the half space, Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva, the ability for these two players to vary the height in their positioning and either come deeper alongside Rodri to act as players able to consolidate their build-up and secure circulation across the width of the field, or whether it was to pull out a central defender, as we see here, Harry Maguire being the player pulled out to then create space in behind for two players in advanced position for Manchester City. Just the flexibility of these four players in the midfield pretty much determined the match. So with this build-up, Manchester United started the game in a 5-3-2 shape, which had its questionable shifting methods across the field. So we have our back five central defenders jumping to these attacking midfielders pretty high up the field, leaving space in behind, but more importantly the midfield shifting along with the two forwards. There were huge question marks around some of their movements through the match, so especially with Fred being keen to jump and press the first line in the midfield third. This would then leave Mason Greenwood, the player, to drop deeper alongside Scott McTominay as the holding midfielder and almost create a makeshift 5-4-1. But what would happen is Mason Greenwood didn't have the capacity to fulfill this role as a Kevin De Bruyne on Manchester City might be able to, whereas Mason Greenwood doesn't have the ability in his overall game to perform such a role, so oftentimes there would be huge disconnections in the midfield and space left in for advanced players of Manchester City. So as we look, we have our back five for Manchester United with our three central midfielders, but now we can really see the distance between Scott McTominay, and in this instance it's Bruno Fernandes, with Fred on this strong side. But now we see the same shifting principles with Fred, McTominay too close together, and now we have Mason Greenwood going to press, joining the midfield, and now we see the problems where Manchester United dig themselves into a hole by leaving this amount of space right in the central corridor in the number 10 position, right around zone 14, just ahead of the box. In these crucial, dangerous moments, by having these huge breakages into these well-connected spaces for Manchester City, is why it shouldn't even be a question on how Manchester United got dominated, because they would leave strong passing connections into these dangerous, well-supported areas with players further forward to then progress the attack even more. And to add to this point, we have Ruben Diaz being the ball carrier in this situation, and he can directly affect the midfield of Manchester United, giving free rein to progress through the half space. So he's more than able to pull out Scott McTominay, a central midfielder from Manchester United, and overextend this space, overemphasize it, and use even more space to exploit and break Manchester United through this central corridor. Now in the second half, through substitution, we saw Jadon Sancho come into the game alongside two central midfielders now to create a 4-4-2, which gave them less cover at the back but allowed their midfielders to extend across a wider area of the field and limited some of the breaking of the Manchester United midfield. But it's starting to be a question of not the structure, but how they carry out their concepts in these structures and basic principles of defending with shifting across, staying connected, and controlling space. So the substitution really didn't change much for Manchester United. City didn't mind whatsoever. They stayed with their basic single pivot, three advanced midfielders, and now they had a dual width shape on either side with the versatility of Cancelo and Foden, easily being able to overload the wide area with the wide structure of Bernardo Silva and Ilkay Gundogan being very close and being able to drop and rotate between these three players in the wide area, giving Manchester United a lot of trouble and often falling victim to the creation of numerical superiority in the wide area via these wide structures of Manchester City. And then with the flexible three-man build-up, it gave them more than enough security to deal with any transitions from Manchester United. So now we'll look at the Manchester City defensive phase and Manchester United's offensive organization. So to start the build-up, they built with two central defenders, with Eric Bailly playing higher up the field in the first half when he was on the field, and this build-up was very ineffective, and it was a simple press from out to in, forcing Manchester United to play through the wide areas or even in the half space through the central defenders, but they would pretty much just be pressed to the sideline and forced to go very vertical and play a forward vertical pass into one of their forwards. The press was supported by a four-man midfield of Manchester City and had very easy shifting roles to cover the first two players pressing, putting the two holding midfielders of Manchester United, Scott McTominay and Fred, in their cover shadows, allowing them to create positional superiority against the ball and effectively press the central defender into a wider area. Now in the midfield third, we see Manchester United switch to their back three, as they did throughout most of the phases throughout the match, or at least in the first half. We have Scott McTominay as the single pivot, with Fred being flexible in his movement, going higher up the field most of the time, but still being able to drop alongside Scott McTominay to form a double pivot. Then further forward, we have Bruno Fernandes pairing up with Cristiano Ronaldo to then form an overload in the half space on the weak side, and on the strong side we have Fred and Mason Greenwood. The wingbacks of Wan-Bissaka and Shaw created full width and started to create some height as well, though the height was mainly created through Cristiano Ronaldo staying higher up the field and playing on the shoulder of the last defenders. Manchester City played in a 4-4-2 in their midfield third and throughout most of the field, with some slight defensive structural rotation in the last third of the field when they were defending in their low block. The biggest keys for them was controlling the space between the line, and despite the numerical overload of Manchester United, they weren't able to effectively pin Manchester City and create superiority through these areas, and their movement off of one another, especially Bruno Fernandes, Fred, and Mason Greenwood. They didn't have coordinated movements to have deliberate actions offensively to then create chances going forward. When Manchester City would defend closer to their goal, their back four would become more narrow, and their midfield four would then span across the full width of the field, with the wide midfielders often dropping in as wingbacks to control the wide areas and prevent crosses. And this is very important. So by creating a back five in these moments, as we'll see in 1 second, it allowed Manchester City to control the area inside the box when crosses came in and stop service whenever possible. But this is in the second half now, when Manchester United changed their shape, so they would only build up with two central defenders, and now they'd have dual width on either side, or allow Mason Greenwood to come in and overload the space between the lines, which Manchester City effectively neutralized by just playing with a high level of compactness. Then on this left hand side with Jadon Sancho and Luke Shaw, they played with dual width, allowing for more free movement off the left hand side of Sancho coming in in a more narrow position. And now the last picture, we see Manchester City creating a back five against crossing situations when Manchester United were in possession of the ball in the final third. So by creating a +1 numerical advantage, it limited Ronaldo's ability to find space inside the box from crosses. A four-man midfield created direct access to the wide areas, as we see cutting off the access of Wan-Bissaka and Luke Shaw playing very narrow. It also allowed them to control the central corridor to deter any passes going inward into advanced players just in front of the box. So this allowed for a very solid defensive approach when they were protecting the space around their goal and limiting what Manchester United are good at, with finding service into Cristiano Ronaldo in advanced dangerous positions, which limited the chances Manchester United were able to create to very few amount, with only a few sticking out at the top of my head. But Manchester City more than comfortable in controlling the entire game. So let me know in the comments below if you think this was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's last game in charge, and I'll see you in the next one.